Portage County Board of Supervisors meeting, recorded August 20th, 2019.
We'll call the Portage County Board to order.
Because to go see him, and he's probably going to do it.
Roll call. If here, press yes. Confirm.
You did a stunt too?
No, I was clear. Okay, we got some missing people.
Gifford?
Bob?
Sorry.
Wake up.
Oh, we'll wait for you.
24 present, 1 excused.
Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Invocation by Supervisor Dodge.
Heavenly Father, as we bow our heads in prayer this evening, we thank you for the many and abundant blessings you have bestowed upon us, and we are grateful. We now request you bestow inspiration and guidance upon us as well. We respectfully request wisdom to govern amid the conflicting interests and issues we face, a sense of the true needs of the people of Portage County, a desire for justice and rightness as we consider the upcoming budget, the ability to work together in harmony even when there is disagreement, and that we consider the agenda before us this evening to benefit those that live, work, and play in Portage County. And as always, we ask for special blessings upon our military, law enforcement, and emergency responders. These things we are asking in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Gene.
Good job.
Review and approval of July 16th, 2019 County Board meeting minutes. Motion by Supervisor O'Brien, seconded by Supervisor Splinter. Any corrections or changes? All those in favor with aye? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Correspondence.
In your packet, you received a memo from Chris Holman, County Executive, regarding the city-county property swap update. And on your desk today, we distributed a brochure regarding economic evolution.
Members of the public who wish to address the county board on specific agenda items must register their requests at this time, with such comments subject to reasonable control of the county board chair as set forth in Robert's Rules of Order. Anybody from the public like to speak? Okay, thank you. First item up, county staff on the storm update. I asked Sheriff Lucas, I've asked Todd, Bob, Jenny, and Nate. I knew there was one I was missing. To give us an update on our last storm with our wind damage and where we're at, so.
Thank you. I'll start out. The week of the July 20th was of course, traumatic for Portage County. And just through the Sheriff's Office alone, just so you're aware, we had 2,100, almost 2,200 calls into our dispatch center in that weekend alone. 474 emergent, 1,660 were non-emergent, and there were numerous others that couldn't get through because our lines were all intact. We opened up the Emergency Operations Center immediately upon the storm, and I'll let the Emergency Manager, Bob, actually talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Sheriff. Yeah, so we opened up the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center.
Mike, please. Mike, please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So we opened up the Emergency Operations Center just after 12 noon when we were able to get into town and open up the facility. We were inundated with information, and we were trying to get an assessment of what was happening out in the field to all the towns and villages. We had quite a few staff in our Emergency Operations Center, and we were activated until Tuesday in the afternoon. Then we stood down to the monitoring level. So we were still operating out of our office, and we've been busy ever since. With that, I'll just leave it at that, and we can go on to some of the other folks that were involved heavily in this incident. Nathan, you want to go ahead?
So for the Highway Committee, our Highway Department started work on Friday night into Saturday when the second round of storms happened. As of Sunday afternoon, we had every single road cleared that didn't have a power line through it. We still had at least 22 locations that had power lines through the trees that were blocking the roads. Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, we're working with our local utility companies on getting those areas cleared. Essentially, that following week, all of our primary responsibilities and other jobs were put on hold, while our main goal was to get everything cleared at least past the shoulder line. Currently, we're at about $225,000 spent on just debris cleanup. We estimate that's going to easily double here by the time we're said and done. We have tried to return to some sense of normalcy with our daily duties and then working on debris cleanup on Fridays and overtime. Fortunately, we didn't have any major infrastructure go down, no major impacts to any culverts, bridge, or roadways, some shoulder washouts, so it's primarily debris cleanup.
Todd?
So for facilities, we had a number of trees go down in different locations. We had one over at the healthcare center that was leaning against the building. Primarily, we really didn't have anything that impacted us too great, other than we had most of the tower sites were without power at one point, so we were running out to tower sites, checking on generators, checking alarms that were going off on those. We did refill the generator for the courthouse and the law enforcement center twice. Sunday morning, I started to get on the phone to locate some generators for both the annex building and the courthouse, because we had been told that the power would be out for up to 5 days. That would be a Monday through up to Friday that the power is going to be out. Worked with Agreco on getting some generators over here. We had generators located. The cost on that was going to push roughly $40,000. Luckily, the power came back on about an hour before they were ordered. So, but it is something to consider in the future when we're looking at buildings and upgrading existing buildings to put those emergency generators and emergency backup supplies into the program. So, but again, we were relatively lucky. We didn't have a tremendous amount of damage.
Jen?
So initially when the storm happens, everybody's out responding, and then they have people like me asking them to document what they're doing, so that weeks after the storm has pass, we can work on making sure to tabulate how much did it cost, and if we have the opportunity for any type of funding sources that might help and assist in paying for these types of events, that we have what we need moving forward to make those requests. What's on your screen is when an event happens, there's different categories of expenses, whether it be labor or equipment or contracted costs that we track as we're working on storm cleanup. There are majorly two categories. One's emergency work and one's permanent work, and within those categories they're broken up. Most of our costs were in category A and category B, which was all emergency type of work, which was debris clearance and protective measures, very heavily in the debris clearance category just because of the type of the storm. There are other categories of permanent work. Typically we see category C, which is road and bridge work, water control facilities. You'll see within the municipalities, the county usually doesn't have any expenses there. Buildings and equipment, if we had buildings damaged or public properties damaged. Utilities, which in this case we did see some public utility damage, so you'll see that. And then category G, which is parks, rec, and other facilities. And we did have quite a bit of damage in our parks as well, but most of our costs were in debris clearance. The next slide is we not only track the county's expenses, but when reporting to the Wisconsin Emergency Management management an event, we have to report on all the municipalities within the county. So we track the information and we give them kind of daily reports on estimates of expenses, which is really hard early on in an event because you really don't know what you're spending and you start to get those initial timesheets and reports of equipment used. There are two funding sources which the county potentially is eligible for when an event happens. One is the Wisconsin Disaster Fund, but in order to qualify, you have to hit a per capita cost in order to apply. We did hit that, as well as a lot of our local municipalities hit that. If the state hits a statewide cost, then there's a potential for assistance through FEMA's Public Assistance Grant, which is funded by the Stafford Act. Last week, we did have a preliminary damage assessment with FEMA, and from that, that's where these numbers came from. These were the validated expenses for the county and the various municipalities that wanted to be included in that process, and please, just going down, so that category A column was roughly $1.6 million for debris clearance, and that was across the county for those that wanted to report their numbers and participate in the public or the preliminary damage assessment. Overall, we started our meeting with FEMA at about $2.1 million, and based on their verified and validated damages, we were just over $1.9 million in damages that they could validate. And so based on that, and statewide, the governor did put forward a request to the president to ask for a presidential declaration, which would make that FEMA public assistance money possible. So we will wait to hear from that. Just because a municipality didn't participate in that process doesn't make them ineligible. So if we are eligible, there will be what's called an applicant meeting or briefing, and at that time, anyone in the county, if we are eligible, would be able to apply for reimbursement through that grant if they meet the thresholds for eligible expenses. Those municipalities affected, of course, the county, Town of Stockton, Village of Plover, Town of Dewey, Town of Lanark, Town of Plover, Village of Nelsonville. We had two public utilities, the Central Wisconsin Electric Co-op and the Adams Columbia Electric Co-op, Town of Amherst, and Village of Whiting. Since that meeting, we've also learned about expenses in the city of Stevens Point and the town of New Hope as well. Did I get them all? Okay. Just so you have a little bit more information on Portage County. Portage County, as Nathan said, his expenses out of that $768,000 total are estimated to come in around $575,000. The rest of the county is about $193,000. And that includes mainly expenses in law enforcement, facilities, and parks. Facilities expenses were mainly equipment expenses for running the generators. Law enforcement was added patrols and dispatch for running those operations because of the storm. And then parks is debris management, and more debris management. Category G, that $12,000, that's estimated for parks repairs. Again, we had lots of damage in our parks, but very little in terms of overall infrastructure kinds of things that needed to be fixed. So we were very lucky in that sense. And that's all I have.
Bob, is there anything left?
Yeah. So I wanted to say that out of this operation, it was great to work with a team of folks from the county. And it was great to work with all the towns and villages. That was so enjoyable for me to do that because we were seeing results come out of it. This is a result coming from all the towns and villages in the county. This is what we presented to FEMA last Wednesday when they came and they reviewed this. They had surprisingly very few questions and words for all the people that were involved. So it turned out very well, and we should be really proud of the towns and villages in the city for helping us out with this. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I talked to quite a few people about when their power's on or off. Fortunately, I only had a blink in Town Hall. We were fine, but several other areas, they would talk to the crews that were out there, and those guys they're not sure, and they'd call WPS, and nobody would know. Was there someone that was coordinating all these work crews, which did a fantastic job, by the way. There was, I mean, in certain areas like in Plover, I mean, it just was like a 5-mile wide tornado. But is there anybody at WPS that's, when these catastrophe type things happen, where they coordinate all these work crews, or is it just?
I'm sure WPS has someone there that they coordinate the operations.
Because it'd be kind of nice next time it happens that if they could have somebody from WPS along with your office give a short press conference every so often, maybe once a day, to give an idea of what's happening, because there were a lot of people, do I get rid of my freezer items, don't I, or whatever, and so it was everybody was kind of uneasy, and the ground kept moving around quite a bit.
I will tell you, Supervisor Splinter, that we talked with WPS, and they will not give definitive answers on regards to when the power is going to come down, which is going to be. We have priorities in regards to certain parts of the county and for the elderly in certain areas, but they can't give us definitive answers because they have to look at the switches where the problems are. They backtrack it through, and it could lead to a lot more. And last thing I want to do is give false hope.
Oh yeah, for sure.
As soon as they say you're going to get your power back in 4 hours and it's 2 more days, people get really upset. So they don't like to give that, and they don't give it to us because they have a hard time predicting it when it comes to a mass situation like this.
And I think they're worried about the wrong message getting out there, as Sheriff Lucas had said. And I know that we had discussion about that. Emergency Management put on a seminar for outlying municipalities to try and help them make sure that they captured the funding and what they were available for, and how to document everything. And we had a staff meeting where we talked about some of the things that went on and were done well, and some things that could be done a little better. And one of the things that we spent a little bit of time on was that public service component of it. But I think that's something that we have to continue to work on or get their trust, because we have a lot of things that take time. If we had the nursing home out of power, it's going to take us a long time to get a generator there and then get someone to hook it up. That we're turning a big ship when we've got to do that. Or if we had to evacuate, these are big things and take a lot of time and a lot of work effort. And if we went through all those motions and as the last person left, we turn the lights back on, it would be nice to have some form of a heads up on that. So I know Bob is going to try and work on the public service end of it. So Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff, for all the work that you did. I know it was a challenging time. As a former emergency management director, I know the challenge, but probably one of the biggest ones, and this is the complaint that I got from a lot of my constituents, is where's the public information officer? And even if there's nothing to say, coming out at least once every couple of hours, saying at this time we have no new information, check back at 4 o'clock or 6 o'clock. What happened was we had these Facebook groups that were sharing information, some of it good, some of it not so good. And I kept looking, because I was, people were asking me, texting me, because of course we still had cell coverage, luckily. And I looked at the county's website, I looked in the sheriff's page, I looked at emergency management page. There wasn't a whole lot of information, so I think that gap could have been very, very helpful. So as you look at the after action, I think looking at public information officer responsibility and that routine outreach, even if there's nothing to say, people want to hear that the EOC people are staffing it, that the Sheriff's Department is out, that the Highway Department is out. Those messages are really important, and saying them over and over is exactly what people need to hear.
I had a separate conversation with Bob about some ideas that I had on that same subject because I had heard some of the same things. So for the people who aren't on Facebook or any of the other things, how do they get that in? Or you're at home and your router doesn't work, so you have no internet. It's different things like that. But a lot of people had radios. I actually went in my garage and turned my radio on in my car so I didn't start it, so get your hopes up. I just went here to listen to it. So.
Safety first.
Supervisor Bob Gifford.
Yeah, this is for any of the four of you who could answer. I heard a piece on Wisconsin Public Radio that just flabbergasted me. Well, I'm easily flabbergastable, but it was that federal emergency funds are only available to restore, like, for example, damaged infrastructure, roads and bridges, to the prior condition they were in, and you're not allowed to upgrade them. So, you know, the standing joke is we get a 100-year flood every 5 years now. And I know Ashland, Bayfield, and Iron County were cited in that story about they wanted to build beefier roads, deeper culverts. I mean, just get ready for the next big one. And they're told no. Is there any change coming down the pike with that?
That's been the rule for a long time. If you're going to, under those permanent categories of work, if you're going to apply and get reimbursement for eligible expenses, it is only to restore to what it was prior to the event. There are certain opportunities that you can apply for hazard mitigation funding, so that if it's, you know, say a flood event and it's an area that continually is flooded, that you can make improvements to reduce the opportunity for that to happen in the future, or you need to buy property to mitigate that. There are opportunities for those types of grants, but under the public assistance program, it is only to restore to prior event condition, and it's a very strict rule. They're also like very strict in terms of, you know, what you can categorize for, whether you can include regular work time or overtime costs, what type of equipment, where you get your equipment rates, how you document everything. It's very strict. Even last week we had a serious conversation about stump removal and the requirements that you need to document removing a stump, and how much would be eligible for reimbursement based on the stump size, how much of the root ball was exposed, do you have the GPS coordinates, did you document that you weren't disturbing a historical ground, that you had to be able to prove all of this in order to get paid to remove a stump. So it's very detailed.
Yeah, the guy from Ashland County said all this is doing, setting us up to go through it all over again in the next flood event, you know.
And keep in mind, FEMA does not tell you you can't make an improvement. All they would say under the grant is, we won't pay for you to make an improvement. So if you want to do that on your own and make that type of improvement, they're not going to stop you. I mean, that was the same conversation we had about stumps. They said, you know, if you want to remove them, that's fine, but we're only going to pay under these conditions.
Sir, if I can add, what we've been doing since May is there's this hazard mitigation plan update for the whole county, for all the towns and villages involved. We're most of the way through that process. And what that does address some of the problems that you talk about. For instance, a culvert's too small, you could resize a culvert, you can build up a road, you could get rid of hazards. We're most of the way through that process, and it's a 5-year plan. Once we get this done, we're going to immediately start working on the next 4 years of developing new thoughts and ideas to fix things. We've had input from all the towns and villages. We've made, my deputy James Williams in the back and I, we've gone through a lot of extremes to get through to people, to get their thoughts from their towns and villages and how they can make improvements. And that does address that in the hazard mitigation portion of this whole big arena.
Thanks.
Not in the recovery piece, though.
Any other Supervisor Matt Jakowski? Barry Jakowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to say, I think as an organization, we should be very proud, be it our emergency management organization. Since the storm, I've talked with several people throughout the county, and it was pretty widespread, and so it wasn't just one corner of the county. And I think we should be very thankful to both Sheriff Lucas's and Commissioner Check's groups. People were very satisfied. Sheriff's Department responding very courteous and trying to help with people who had medical problems and needed power. Commissioner Check's crews were out working. Everybody said what a delightful bunch of people trying to help get things off the road. And I really think we should be very proud, although everybody wasn't as happy with the utility companies as they should be. I think as a county organization, everybody did their part, and again, I was just flabbergasted with the amount of people that said how courteous and how helpful both the Sheriff's Department and the Highway Department were. So I really think we should give them a round of applause.
And I believe on the utility side of it, we have public service, and they're usually very, very responsive. But we had a storm Friday in the northern part of the state, and I think most of those public service folks had gone up north to try and help those people get their power restored. So they were actually gone when the storm hit here, and that's what took a while, I think, for everybody else to get their power back on. So is there any other questions? Supervisor Pataki.
No question, just comments. As the chairman of the Public Protection Committee, I would personally like to thank the sheriff and his staff for what they did. Our dispatchers had many hundreds of calls. We had, I believe, 2 or 3 dispatchers who were not even called, were off, came in on their own to help out the dispatchers that were there. Several years ago, we started a take-home car program, and we had people who had just gotten off, the deputy just got off a shift, and because they had their cars at home, when they were called, they got into the cars and immediately started working rather than having to come back to the Sheriff's Department, pick up a squad car, and then start working. So again, great job, Sheriff.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. We're fortunate here in Portage County. We have some really excellent employees and some hardworking and dedicated. So I know that also living in this community, I was out shortly after the storm trying to help open up some of the roads, and the neighbors were all out there helping pick up brush and moving branches and checking on people that were older in the neighborhood and everything. And it just, it's a great place to live. So when you see that kind of thing. So anybody else have any questions? Okay, thank you, folks. They're already applauding for you, Ray. Next up is Ray Shabilsky, Health and Human Services Annual Report.
How much? Don't the applause come at the end? We could go to a boo and a hiss.
What's the end?
That's how long it is. Thanks, Ray.
First of all, let me say that is one tough group to follow. I mean, as Jim Clark would say, the intelligence was just reeking up here, wasn't it? So, anyway, you should have a copy of our 2018 annual report. I am certainly not going to go through that page by page. We'd be here for a while. But just some of the highlights. I mean, basically, almost all of our programs were up, some significantly, some slightly. CCS, which is Comprehensive Community Services, and our Children's Long-Term Support, Adult Protective Services, Crisis, all went up. We had more child welfare access calls, more investigations, more children placed, more juvenile justice referrals. Our prenatal care coordination numbers were up. And if you do have time, when you do have time to review that, I would suggest you look at page 16 and 17, which is our community health assessment and our community health improvement plan for the county. I think there's some valuable information. Some of our programs had slight decreases, but that's, part of that is due, I think, with the better economy, we have less people receiving economic support. Just a note, as I've told our board, as well as the finance committee, we continue this year, unfortunately, to have a large number of court order placements for both children and adults. We can't say no. If the judge orders that child into residential care or into an institution, if it's an adult, we're on the hook for anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000 per person per month. So that is going to have an impact on our budget moving forward. Be happy to answer any questions that you have tonight, or if you find questions, please feel free to give us a call.
Any questions for Ray? Wow, you're lucking out. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's give him a baby.
Best support ever.
Ryan Rose. Parks 2018 annual report.
I'd expect that. So, thank you, everyone, for having me here today. I got a few things I'd like to say before I get to my annual report. Last year was my first, can you all hear me?
Well,
okay. No? I think I'm too tall. There we go. Last year was my first attempt at giving an annual report, and I recall talking to Chair Haga, how does this work? I never gave one before, so his response to me was make it quick, Rose. So this year, I didn't ask him. I'm just going to go through what I have to say here, and hopefully it goes well for me. I know a lot of you are expecting me to get on with the report, but I do want to start off by saying a few thank yous. Most of you probably have heard that I had a little bit of an issue back in June. I had some brain surgery, so if I stutter a little bit or I miss my words, it'll get better, so I'll try to do my best. I first want to start off by thanking my wife, St. Michael's, St. Joseph's Hospital, and also I wanted to thank all of you in the room for your well wishes and your kindness, and it was very much appreciated. So again, it was something that was very true, and I appreciate all of that from all of you. Second, I'd like to thank those individuals that are not here. I got a lot of staff from the county itself, a lot of employees in the county that reached out to me, and I greatly appreciated that. And these are in no order, of course. Third, I want to thank the county department heads. They really helped me out in a difficult situation. They helped my staff out. And they were there for us for a lot of things, and specifically, I want to thank Todd Neufeld for his humor. Todd had contacted me multiple times, and he made me laugh, and I think that's the best medicine. I also want to thank Laura and Susan from HR. They help my wife navigate through the FMLA, and it was very much appreciated. So if you could tell Laura she's not
in
here.
The back corner.
There she is. Thank you, Laura. I also want to thank Jennifer and Tricia for helping out my staff with the financial end. It really meant a lot, and some of you may not know this, but Director Josie is someone who plays with numbers a lot, and most of you don't know she has a really serious, witty personality. So when I was in the hospital before they let me leave the ICU, I had to do a math problem, and the problem was 100 minus 23. I failed at that at multiple attempts, and I finally hit it out of the ballpark with 76. My therapist said close enough. After telling Jen my experience with this, without skipping a beat, Jen says, so they threw you the calculus. So thank you, Jen, for making me laugh. She always does, and I really appreciated it. Lastly, I want to apologize to Sheriff Mike Lucas. I got a phone call from a gentleman while I was in the hospital, and on the other line, it was Mike. And he said he heard about what happened to me, and he just wanted to call and check up on me and see how I was doing. And he wanted to make sure he wasn't violating HIPAA law, which I thought was ironic from a sheriff. I said, don't worry about it, Mike, you're fine. But what Sheriff Lucas doesn't know is that for the first few minutes of our conversation, I thought I was talking to Mayor Mike Wiesa, not Sheriff Mike Lucas. So, sorry, I apologize. Same size. So moving on to the annual report, you've got a big packet, and there's a lot of information in there. Just kind of talks about our parks, so I just kind of want to move on to the annual report highlights and touch base on that and maybe some of the things we're trying to do right now in the parks itself. So in the back of it, annual report, our camping was up from 2017 by about 3%. It was $237,560. Our lodge rentals were up about 0.5%, so they're basically even, which is hoping they could get a little higher, but over the years they've kind of flatlined out. Our firewood sales, I don't know how it happened, but they were identical to 2017 to the dollar. I double checked to make sure I put the right year in, and I did, so they were both the same number, so I guess that's not bad. It was a good number. Our skiing was down a little bit. That can be due to the weather. It was cross-country skiing, so sometimes we don't get enough snow. The skiers don't come in until later. They don't buy their season passes early when we don't have the snow. So that was probably due to the little bit of a number down, but 12% of 31,000 isn't a huge number, so we're hoping to get that back up. We also have other sources of revenue at the disc golf course, our dog park, and our mountain bike. That was in line with what we had. Our boat launch permits were up about 500. We make about $20,000 on our 2 boat launches. That money's put into a reserve account or a fund that stays there, and we can only use that for the boat launch improvements. So I don't know the exact number of what's in there right now. We've been doing it for, I think, 3 years. And our Dewey shooting range is pretty consistent. Some people call it a deer hunting shooting range. We make about 60% of the money for the shooting range from the last week of October until deer season, so that's when everyone floods in. But again, that was in that same number as the other years at about $11,000. Some of the new and exciting things that happening at Standing Rocks, and you'll be voting on one tonight for an approval for a donation. But we did last year put in a 1-mile lighted loop of cross-country ski trail. That was through a grant through the state, a Trails State Aid grant. So that was paid for through that grant. The one you're voting on tonight is from Edith and Dallas Pankowski. They had written me a letter wanting to donate some money to the park, so they are going to be giving us $50,000 with your approval, and they would like more lights put in. We will put the lights in for ourselves, but that's all free, and it doesn't cost us anything other than our labor to put it in. We got great reaction from the public by doing so, putting these lights in. It'll go really well with our new building that we're having constructed right now. It's coming along very nicely. We haven't had any issues with it. That is going to be right out by Standing Rocks Park itself, and it's coming along very nicely. They've been great to work with. Ability Builders is doing the construction on it, and they've been wonderful to work with so far. We also have the PASTA. PASTA stands for Point Area Single Track Association. It's our mountain bike club out there. They actually are raising money on their own as a group to update our mountain bike trails. Our trails were put in a long time ago, and therefore I call them Red Bull riders. They're very difficult to ride, and we wanted to make them easier for children and the average person to be able to ride them. So they redid about 8 miles, and next year they're going to do a little more of the trail system to make it easier for everyone to ride. Let's see what else I have here. We added 3 new sites at Lake Emily. They came in handy this year because the storm blew out about 30-something of our sites. We're hoping to have the southern part of Lake Emily open for Labor Day, but the north will probably be shut down well into September. We've got electrical boxes that are out and a lot of cleanup there to do, but guys are working extremely hard to get it done, just like everyone else is working hard to get their projects done. And then we also had, this is our first year where we implemented everyone's paying power if they're on a site for power, and that has proven to be a good decision. I think we made about $8,000. That's how much we were getting kind of, I don't want to say ripped off, but people were registering online, and you get to click yes or no, do you want power, because it was always an option. Well, there's no way to really track that, so we took the yes, no out, and if you have a site that has power on it, you will pay the $6. And we do have sites that are available without power. You can always choose one of those. So if there are no questions, or if there is any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Rose?
All right.
I guess with that, I'd like to say I'm glad that you're back and you are able to maintain your terrific sense of humor. So it's well appreciated, and we're all glad to see it. Next up, Andrea Benke and Louis Malewski Jr., Portage County Justice Programs and Current Work Groups. I asked Andrea and Mr. Malewski to come and speak. We hear every once in a while that we need to do more to try and keep people out of jails, and I asked them to come in and make sure that they can give us an update and let us know some of the programs and some of the things that we're working on to do that. So. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. Yep, so I was asked by a couple county board members to put a presentation together about justice programs, how we started, where we're at today. This is a presentation I usually give. It's about an hour long, so I'm condensed it quite a bit, and I will run through it quick. So questions at the end, please let me know. So how justice programs started is that in November of 1996, the county received a grant to look at justice programs, justice systems in the county. In December of '99, Portage County was awarded a 3-year pilot project to look at reducing jail space, and which ultimately would save money for the county. Some of the examples of the things in those 3 years that were looked at were expanding the day report program, continuing the Justice Coalition, which still happens today, and another one would be the home detention program through the jail. Within 17 months of that 3-year program, it showed that there was a high reduction in jail space, which again ultimately saved the county a lot of money. So the justice programs position that I'm in became permanent in 2002. Justice programs through the coalition has 37 actual members and 19 interested parties on the coalition. The purpose of the coalition is to assess the need of the county for justice programs, evaluate the effectiveness of the programs that we could use in the county, and also utilize evidence-based practices. And with that, then we create programs and evaluate them to determine that they continue to do well and do what they're supposed to be doing. Some of the prior programs that Justice Programs has supervised is the OWI Intensive Supervision Program, which is now our pre- and post-program for OWI offenders. The Diversion Program has now moved to the District Attorney's Office. We used to have the Community Service Program and the Volunteers and Probation Program. And with that, I'll have the DA speak about diversion.
Thank you, Andrea. And as you can see, the diversion program is now in the District Attorney's Office, moving from Justice Works. With that move, we've tripled the size of the program. We've had 298 referrals to the program. We've accepted 276, as you can see. We have an even mix of felony and misdemeanor type classifications. We've had a high success for completion of 120 completed. And the diversion coordinator, Mr. Pyle, has 159 active caseloads. As I've informed my governing committee, Judicial Gen, that is the max caseload for that person. So we'll be requesting an additional person in the state budget, excuse me, the county budget. And right now we're writing a state grant to fund it with TAD money. Next. Next, the recidivism success rate. This is important to the population. They want to know, are we putting people in that should be in Mike's facility or under community supervision of the Department of Corrections? Brian Pyle is an agent with over 10 years of experience. As you can see the numbers, we have a 95.86% success rate for those. We've only had to seek revocations of 14 people. When that happens, their case continues as if it in the court. For deferred prosecution, that means a case that was never filed in court, then the case gets filed. And a deferred entry of judgment means the case is filed, but it's the person's put on supervision within our office. When they get revoked, they get sentenced. Next, financial program. As you can see, I promised this county that we would try to pay for the program via fees. We charge $250 per person for the programming. This is a voluntary program. As you can see, we've collected upwards of $63,000, almost $64,000. That goes in the county's general fund, and we've had $87,000 plus dollars in restitution ordered, and that goes directly to victims. The victims like it. That's another thing that the taxpayers, citizens, victims want, which is they want their money back. So, for example, you have wire being taken off pivots, irrigation lines. We get the person's paying right away so that the farmer has the copper restored, what have you. And we've had a significant amount of money restored in some very old cases that, frankly, would not have been able to prove but for the program.
So some of the programs right now is our current day report kiosk program, or with the kiosk that's in it. It's run through Justice Point, who we contract with, and Jamie and his staff do a wonderful job with that. We currently have about 64 participants on average with that. What that program is for people that are on bond that need additional supervision while they're out. They are provided a case manager if needed. They get random drug tests and also breathalyzers, which is done through the kiosk. We had a work group this year because of the change in provider to ensure that this became more of an evidence-based practice program. And with that, what was determined is that everybody that gets into that program is assessed. With that assessment, they determine if they're low, medium, or high risk offender. With that, what does risk mean in a pretrial program? What that means is that we have to determine if that person is at risk to reoffend while on pretrial, or if they're at risk for not showing up for court. Those are the two things that we have to assess for. With that information, we determine what type of level of supervision they receive, and then what type of consequences they receive if they do not follow through with what they need. That is a change. Normally, everybody was treated the same, and what we're showing with what's changed over the time is that with the previous provider, we were having about 5 referrals to the jail every week being done. Now we're seeing about 10 to 15 we predict this year will happen, because we're starting to work with more people long term rather than just saying, if you're not showing up, we're going to be referring you for bail jumping charges. So we're trying to make a change to try other things first before we look at having bail jumping being filed. The other program is the pretrial supervision program, and that's for third OWI and higher offenders. And those are for people, and it's usually most judges will refer to the pretrial or have them go on pretrial on bond anyway. But it's for people that need to have more structure while they're out on bond. They receive a case manager who they need to meet with. They receive an assessment to determine how often they need to be testing. And they also get random drug testing and breathalyzers through that also. Post-program, that is for people that have successfully completed the pre-program, and then they were sentenced on their OWI charged. They have, what the advantage of that is that they get a reduced jail sentence, and they are likely released on the bracelet for electronic monitoring, and then they continue with programming while they're out. We did a recidivism study on all of these programs, but this one's most interesting. In the last 3 years for recidivism in this program, it was for OWI, so if they recidivated with OWI only is what we looked at, it was 2% of people that were in this program. So those aren't really paltry numbers. They're pretty low on that. So the costs averted through 2018. If you look for the minimum cost, so we looked at for all the days in programming in 2018 through pretrial, home detention, through the jail and probation. We had a cost savings. We are looking at people being sent to Wapaka County at $1.3 million. And the cost savings if we had people staying in Portage County in the jail was $3.6 million. So that was the maximum savings and the minimum savings. I'll talk a little bit about Portage House. Portage House is we contract with the DOC for funding through that. It is a place that provides a structured, comprehensive, evidence-based, intensive treatment placement for medium to high-risk male offenders. There's a partnership we have with the DOC, HHS, Justice Programs, and those are our treatment providers that we contract with because most of the men that stay there do get services. And there's 3 tracks within Portage House. The first track is the classic halfway house, which you kind of typically would think of. 4 beds are available. The average stay is 90 to 100 days. They primarily focus on sobriety and employment, and sex offenders are allowed to stay in that program there. The other one is the Community Residential Program, or CRP. 8 beds are available for that. Average stay is 120 days. We subcontract for anger management, alcohol and drug counseling, and mentoring. You must be medium to high risk to be in there. And they receive dosage hours, which means basically treatment, supervision, and all their cognitive groups and things that they have to attend. And that's the part where the state has really been pushing for people to receive treatment that way. The third track is the non-residential outpatient track. There's 9 slots available for that. It's for people that do not necessarily stay at Portage House, but they do have housing, but they're able to receive the programming there. It also works for people that have stayed at Portage House, but then they find a place to live and they need to continue and finish their treatment. That's a good spot for them to be in, so that's part of that. Those are the partners of all of the treatment that they receive while they're at Portage House, and that the staff and that the DOC provide all of those, plus who we contract with for those services. 2018 Portage House statistics, 75 clients were served. 61% of them were from Portage County. They had about almost a 99% occupancy rate, and 48 out of the 75 were successfully completed the program, so it was 64%. 58 of those clients that were put in there were placed on alternative to revocations. Those are people that are on probation that instead of being sent to jail or prison, they're given an alternative and they use Portage House. So many of them would be spending some jail or prison time if Portage House was not available. Currently, the wait list for Portage House is very long. Right now, they're looking at a 90 to 100-day wait list for somebody to even get in. So it's a service that's very needed in the community. And probably you a lot have heard about the current drug court program or treatment court program that we have. It's currently funded through the TAD grant, which we receive through the state, which also we have matching funds. How people are placed in there is that they're either court-ordered or they are alternative to revocation or through their probation. We have a multidisciplinary team with judge and many others that are on the slide that have to meet weekly to talk about the people that are placed in there. People have to have regular court appearances, drug testing, sanctions, those types of things. And we have 4-to-1 incentives to sanctions. Statistics show that works well with people that are high risk, high need. People have to be high risk, high need for this program to work because of the high dosage hours they receive. If you put somebody in there that's lesser risk, medium risk, and you put them in a program like this, they will do worse. So who can participate? You must be high risk, high need to be in there, and you cannot be convicted of a violent offense. That is through our TAD funding. That is not our rule, but it's through the funding that we receive. They say that they do not want violent offenders in there, so that excludes quite a few people, at least through probation and parole, that aren't able to refer people because of that. So what does high risk, high need mean? What that means is that people that are likely to fail at any traditional treatment, they're at high risk and they need this type of intensive treatment. And also the needs look at people who, if they receive this type of intervention and this type of treatment, they are likely to not commit further crime. So the regular court programming requirements, it requires that they have to have a lot of dosage hours, have to go to court quite regularly. They have 2 treatment groups a week, 1 individual session weekly. The better they do and they move up in their phases, they only have to do twice a month. They have to do a trauma group, a life skills group, and job readiness. They also have to meet with their case manager regularly, their probation officer regularly, and sometimes law enforcement stops at their home. And it's not to search them or to search their person, search their belongings. It's to stop in and check on them, build a relationship. That's kind of the big change. We want people to learn that not to fear law enforcement, to lie to them. We want them to have a different relationship with them.
These people are drug addicts. Their choice, number one, is to use the addiction or to feed their addiction. So the studies have all shown that putting people in long-term prison settings really should be the ultimate last. This person is just broken. There's a sentence. So we've really come a long way in this county. We've really changed our metric, and that's why the sheriff's numbers, in some respects, the jail bed days, we've reduced significant jail bed days, and we're putting people in that are really need close supervision. But the programming, I would encourage anybody to come to it, because these are people that were routinely burglarizing homes to feed their habits. They are people whose children are being supervised by a RAISE department. They've lost their children, and their only interest is the next fix. So it's interesting when you see them come in and they are completely hooked on whatever it is, and they're leaving, and they actually look good, right? Which is, there's a positive nature to that relationship.
So these are the contracted agencies we use for drug court. We use Ascension for the treatment and for the residential, Justice Point for the case manager and technician, and also Options Lab, who provides very intensive testing. We've had people test positive on poppy seeds. We've had people test positive on CBD oil. So we have really intensive testing for people in this court, and it's required. If you want a good court, you have to have good testing. So this is our data starting from the day that drug court started in March of 2017 until May 24th of 19. We've had almost 9,000 days of people being in programming, and so we're looking at medium security cost savings, because the likeliness of some of these people would probably go into a medium security prison, $730,000 of cost savings. Or if we looked at people going to the Portage County Jail at close to a little over $100 a day, close to $1 million in savings with the program. So the great Kate Kipp, who was the previous me, who was amazing, taught me this, and I really liked it. So how do we have systems change to ensure that evidence-based programs are implemented and then they're working? So she showed me this, and I thought it was wonderful. So there's parts to where you need to assess, plan, implement, and evaluate the programs that we have, and then that's how you come up with your performance measures to see if your program's working. So how we do this in Portage County is we do this through work groups. And so in the 2019, we've had 4 work groups. 2 are adjourned, 2 we have currently. The 2 adjourned work groups are, one is the Veterans Court Work Group, which we had met and decided not to move forward on, that there wasn't quite the need in our county for that. We also had, like I said, the day report pretrial supervision, because we wanted to make our program more evidence-based. The 2 currently moving that we have going on is the non-monetary bonds that the DA will speak about, and then we have the domestic violence one.
And we're almost finished, by the way. So the non-monetary bonds, essentially, what does that mean? It's just a fancy way of saying, should this county move towards less cash? If you pick up the Stevens Point Journal, just ironically today, they did a very long article about the Marathon County Jail, their jail administrator, and also dovetail that with the Public Defender's Office and the lack of attorneys, and also the inability to pay bails that most of us wouldn't think would be too hard to pay. $225, $125, $150, and then you have people sitting in jail 30, 60, 90 days, and the ultimate sentence is 10-day jail sentence or no jail. So now they've sat longer than the person that can pay. And why is that a problem? We really need to make sure that we don't treat people who are indigent differently than people who can pay, who have the same crime, same risk score. They should be sentenced uniformly. So this is a nationwide thing. The state legislature already did a discussion on this. Tomorrow or Thursday we'll have a meeting. You're welcome to come to the sheriff's office, the training room at noon, and the Milwaukee County person that ran this system will discuss it. Ultimately, where are we going? There will be more pre-trial if we implement it. Pre-trial release, and by the way, you would all get a kick at this as far as a vote, with more bracelets. You need to get Mike's office, another person, to monitor all this, or if we don't do that, to pay a provider like Justice Point to do the monitoring. You know, it's different models, but ultimately to get people working and into rehabilitation up front than sitting in jail, frankly, doing nothing. But the caveat is this: some people we will always request high cash. So the person that's accused of trying to kill someone or killing someone, we're always going to be requesting high cash because the risk of their flight is so great. Next. The data, as you just see very briefly, 64.56 days for a person who's indigent versus 18.85 who could afford a private person, 34.83 days. This is for $1,000 cash bail or more versus or less, excuse me, versus 7.52. It's just very stark numbers, and so we want to work on that. And if you go on the Stevens Point website, or pay your $5 to watch it or whatever it is, you can watch a video of some people that there's a problem. And the bigger issue is, as Supervisor Robbie knows, and his son, is that we don't have enough attorneys to take these cases. So right now, I have a person that's sitting in prison, thankfully on a sentence. But if that person was not serving a sentence, that person is waiting now for 8 months for an attorney. And because the charge is so severe, I would have asked for significant cash and had him sitting pre-trial, and he's innocent until proven guilty, and that's a problem because the attorneys don't want to take it for $40 an hour. That goes to $70 as of January 1st, but just for your budget, I don't anticipate the number of private attorneys taking those cases to significantly increase. Ultimately, the court will be having to order county pay at $100 an hour.
When we were working on the research, we were finding that some people that were sitting in jail on $50, they couldn't afford because they were homeless and whatnot. A lot of the research shows that if you put a low-risk person that maybe can't pay $50 and then putting them in jail in mixed populations, they're going to come out high risk because they've made friends, they've got to meet people, and those types of things. So those are one of the advantages to having a pretrial program, is that we can avoid some of that. Real quickly on the domestic violence, we're looking at finding a long-term sustainable way to have a domestic violence program. We do have a short-term fix right now where we have a person privately running the group. We're looking at seeing if Portage County would be willing to contribute a cost to uninsured or indigent clients if we could find a nonprofit agency to run a domestic violence program here in Portage County.
And just that I would put a plug in, we put a lot of money in United Way, right? Our county members, we put money in that, we all contribute, and there's been a bit of a dichotomy, a bit pushback on whether or not those monies should be put into criminal justice. Next time you see anybody with United Way, put a plug in. I've been doing that behind the scenes, saying this money should be put into programming because it benefits everyone. And it shouldn't just come out of the county levy. That's just too difficult with the tax restrictions. Any questions?
Go back one slide. Up there it says whether Portage County would be able to contribute, and you said would be willing to contribute. Those are two different things.
And it's both. So would you be able to, and would you be willing to?
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody else have any questions? Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, folks, for your presentation. I would like to go talk about, well, it's under current justice programs on number 5. It's pretrial supervision programs, PTSP. For OWI, third or higher offenses involving drugs or alcohol. We had an individual that actually lives in my district, was picked up on their 7th, I believe, OWI. She was, the individual was bonded out, was back in the tavern, I think probably the night that she was bonded out. Didn't show up for court. Was on, for lack of a better term, on the lam for about a month. The sheriff's department was actively looking for, but for both weather conditions and luck, she was able to evade. She was eventually picked up in Wapaka County, snagged up, per se, in Wapaka County. Bailed out of there, got back in Portage County, and the judge let her back out on bond. Wondering how this happened.
Well,
No day reporting, no breathalyzer. She was in the tavern every evening.
I'd have to, Supervisor, if you give me a last name, I could look it up, give you some background on that.
I probably can, but I don't feel the need to do it in...
If somebody's ordered to day report, it's on CCAP, so because it'll say if they are.
Well, she obviously wasn't ordered to day report because she was in the tavern every night.
That doesn't stop anyone from going to the tavern.
Right. Ultimately, for example, we just had the defendant I'm prosecuting, Jeremiah Button, and I'll just say for the record, he is innocent until proven guilty. I have to say that. Mr. Button was just picked up. He is innocent until proven guilty, but he failed to show to court 2 weeks before his trial, and the judge had a $25,000 cash bail. That's a lot of money. I mean, I don't have $25,000 sitting around. And he posted it. His mother posted it. She put, I think she cashed in her retirement. And we just picked him up 3.5 years later in Marathon. This system, how it is we do not have the ability to do something called remand, as you see on Law and Order, where you don't get bail. You have the absolute constitutional right to get out. There is a statute that we're trying to change. It does say that the DA in extraordinary circumstances can request, if they can show XXX issues related to risk, then remand does occur. But then I have to bring the person to trial in 60 days. And that's not happening when we have a system where we need an additional branch, and we have 4 DAs when we are staffed at 57% of our staffing load. But we're trying to change that, because right now we have to change the Constitution, where the judge can consider risk. In your situation, the OWIs, we routinely request at the base, starting at OWI 4th, $2,500 to $5,000 cash, and then on a situation like that, we're requesting $10,000 plus. If they can post, they post. Because I agree that the OWI, and we also consider it when they're driving and hurt someone, that they recklessly hurt someone while operating a dangerous weapon, which is the vehicle. But the pretrial issue, that's why this county is going to more pretrial supervision. If that person was not in a pretrial program, which they don't have to be if they don't want to be. If they don't want to be, then they have cash, bond, and that's it. That's the programming for them. But we want them to be in pretrial because they start getting a manager to stop the drinking.
So a judge can't look at the individual's record and make them day report? Is that what you're telling me?
No, they can ask for day reporting, yes.
So how does this individual being picked up on their 6th drunk driving, or OWI, not have to do random, at least random, maybe not daily, but at least random?
I don't know if they don't. I assume they do.
Well, I know the individual, and I don't know how she'd ever pass any of them, whether they're all random.
Well, you'd be surprised. They time their drinking. And unlike THC or other controlled substances that stay in the system, alcohol dissipates at a defined rate, depending on body size and what's in your stomach.
Well, the THC would have been in their system, too.
Yeah. Well, and remember, if she's only blowing, she's not getting UA. Okay.
Any other questions?
The people in my area felt the system failed them. That's all I could.
Yeah. Well, if you got a name, I'll look it up because I'm curious where she is in the process.
Any other questions? I have one. Can either one of you or the sheriff, we have a full-time social worker in the jail, is that correct? Do you know of how many other counties have a full-time social worker in their jails, if any?
Larger counties, for sure.
Milwaukee, Madison, Milwaukee or Dane or?
Wapaka.
Sheriff?
Quite a few, and more getting mental health professionals in there also.
I think it's hard to dispute that we're not doing a lot to try and keep people out of jails and trying to give them all the tools to be successful and stay out of jails. I'm disappointed that Supervisor Mua isn't here tonight to hear this, because that's one of the things that seems to be a strong talking point with her, and it's important that she could have been here to hear this, because a lot of this was a benefit for her and everyone else, because we talk about all the things that we do in the county and how it ends up just being in a silo and it just goes to one committee and that's where it dies. So I've been trying to make sure that we get other people in here to talk about other things, so we all get to hear a lot of the same information and we're all well informed. So with that, if there's no other questions, I want to thank both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take just a couple minutes here. We'll all watch Kathy walk. She's got to get the system back up.
It's a running joke.
And there she goes back.
Kathy.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Number one, adoption of 2020-2025 Portage County Capital Improvement Plan.
Resolution 142, 2018-2020, submitted by Capital Improvement Economic Development Committee, adopting the capital improvement plan.
Motion by Supervisor James Gifford, seconded by Supervisor Dodge. Any questions? All those in favor, push yes, and oppose no.
Trying.
Somebody go up, put a check mark up there for her.
Gotta vote again, then push the.
24 ayes, 1 excused, resolution adopted.
Number two, resolution authorizing a new position in accordance with Human Resource Policy 3.11.5.1 for Health and Human Service Department.
Resolution 143, 2018-2020, submitted by Health and Human Services and Human Resources, authorizing new position for HHS.
Motion by Chris Dubek, seconded by Supervisor Moresi. Any discussion? All those in favor push yes and oppose no.
Aye. 24 ayes, 1 excused, resolution adopted.
Number three, confirming the appointment of Christopher Schultz as Portage County Procurement Director.
Resolution 144, 2018-2020, submitted by Finance Committee, confirming Christopher Schultz, Procurement Director.
Motion by Supervisor Rakowski, seconded by Supervisor Dodge. Discussion. All those in favor push yes and oppose no.
Twenty-four ayes, 1 excused.
And I believe Mr. Schultz is ready to come on board September 1st. 3rd, September 3rd, so we'll stay tuned, so thank you. Number 4, authorization of increased hours for volunteer caregiver program coordinator, allocation of reserve funds to pay for the increased hours to 1 FTE.
Resolution 145, 2018-2020, submitted by Commission on Aging, Human Resources, and Finance Committees, authorizing the increased hours for the caregiver program coordinator.
Motion by Supervisor Moresi, seconded by Supervisor Johnson. Discussion. All those in favor, press yes, and opposed, no.
Twenty-four ayes, 1 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 5, filling by appointment the office of County Clerk for the residual of the unexpired 2017-2020 term.
Resolution 146, 2018-2020, submitted by Executive Operations and Finance Committee, approving filling by appointment the office of County Clerk. It is a budget adjustment resolution and requires a 2/3 supermajority vote.
Motion by Supervisor Zadroik, seconded by Supervisor Pataki. Discussion. I'm going to miss these two. All in favor, vote yes, and opposed, no.
Gonna miss her.
24 ayes, 1 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 6, designation of giant hogweed, I'm not even going to try, as a noxious weed within Portage County.
Resolution 147, 2018-2020, submitted by Land and Water Conservation, designating giant hogweed as an additional noxious weed within Portage County.
Motion by Supervisor O'Brien, seconded by Supervisor Barry Jakowski. Discussion. Supervisor Robbie.
Just curious, what is the implication of such a designation?
Barry, can you help us out?
I'll try my best. It will give our County Weed Commissioner, Mr. John Aaron, who has been very helpful in these invasive species, the authority to go out and work with landowners in controlling patches of this. It allows him the authority to actually remove them or to destroy these weeds if landowners do not cooperate. But most, and when I say that, most every time, landowners are just not aware and are very helpful in eliminating these. And it actually, as those of us that have all sat here and watched the presentation on wild parsnip, this causes a more severe burning than the wild parsnip itself. So,
some bad stuff. Supervisor Bob Gifford.
Yeah, from the presentation we got at Land and Water Committee, this is like even more horrific than the wild parsnips. It's like a horror movie waiting out there to happen.
All right, any other discussion? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, vote yes, and opposed, no.
Make it go blind, too.
That's the only thing. Permanent.
24 ayes, 1 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 7, approving and authorizing acceptance of donated funds from Dallas and Edith Penkowski and a 2019 budget adjustment or additional lighted trails at the Standing Rocks Park.
Resolution 148, 2018-2020, submitted by Park Commission and Finance Committee, approving acceptance of donated funds. Budget adjustment resolution requires 2/3 supermajority vote.
Motion by Supervisor Loddick, seconded by Supervisor Bob Gifford. Discussion. Supervisor Medin.
This couple has been a very active in making other sources of contribution, not necessarily financial, but in other ways within the community. I'm very happy to have, pleased to give them some accolades for that. I wonder if we do have a formal way that has been done, Ryan, and maybe you could explain that to us. I think it's important to recognize a couple with this level of contributions.
Yeah, they're might want to steal it from Ray. Go or.
They had sent me a letter wanting to donate to the parks, and I had met with them several times over the course of about 3 weeks. And what we agreed upon, and they were happy with, was we are going to actually use one of these giant rocks and put a plaque on it, and that'll be placed next to the building, and we will call the trails the Edith and Dallas Pankowski Trails, and they were happy with that.
And that's very similar to the one at the Steinhagen.
Yeah, just a bigger rock, yep.
So if you've seen that, more money gets you a bigger rock.
Bless you.
Not necessarily the rock is just there.
No, I agree with Mr. Medine, and it was a discussion at one of the park committee meetings or one of the, of how to recognize such a generous gift and a donation. And we've heard so much about the other lighted trail and the loops and stuff, and a lot of the people that get out later in the fall when it's dark sooner have to work, so when they get done work, they're able to go out on the trails and stuff and enjoy it a little bit more. So, and it's LED, so it's a great thing, and it's going to be a huge improvement, another huge improvement for outstanding rocks, and another great addition to Portage County Parks. So, any other discussion? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor with yes and opposed no.
24 ayes, 1 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 8, resolution authorizing and ratifying the 2020 ambulance service provider agreement between Portage County and the City of Stevens Point.
Resolution 149, 2018-2020, submitted by Public Safety, Emergency Management, and Finance Committee, authorizing the ambulance service agreement with the city and requires a 2/3 supermajority vote.
Motion by Supervisor Johnson, seconded by Supervisor Jankowski. Discussion. Supervisor Matt Jankowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I looked through the ambulance contracts and ended up looking at costs and then Annex B, which is a coverage area map, I noticed that the Plover coverage area is about a quarter of what Stevens Point used to cover. But then I look at the contract for the city of Stevens Point, and I notice the contract price has gone up. I find that very hard to believe. We're taking a quarter of their service area, but yet we're going to give them more money.
They have a 2 paramedic system.
Jenny or Chris, who wants this one?
Do you have a question?
So, you're.
I'm just making the statement that I find that hard to believe, that we're taking a quarter of their service area, Plover's taking a quarter of their service area, but yet we're providing the city of Stevens Point more money. Usually when somebody has to do less service in a contracted area or their contracted area gets smaller, we take money away. It's very hard to understand.
I could speak briefly to it. I hear what you're saying, and I think historically, if you look at how the system's been talked about, whether you're talking about straight economics or the politics to it, which have been, as many of you know, pretty messy over the years, you're looking at things like call volume, response time, other arbitrary sorts of measures to try to make one argument stronger or the other. But at the end of the day, you know, even if you shrink the response areas, like you've noted, what the county's funding with the system as a whole is the cost of providing the service. So the costs of, it'd be the same thing for Amherst or Plover. You know, when people looked at Amherst, they said, well, they're going to have a quicker response time. Same thing with Plover. Now we added, I think, a little over $600,000 last year for Plover to the system, but the call volume stayed the same. So was it a good thing? I think that everybody's happy that Plover is there. The system's very strong. I think that, the bang for the buck factor is certainly there. But I think that at the end of the day, when you look at it, I view it more as like, what's the business side of this? If you try to look at it as call volume, then you're going to start punishing places like Amherst that have less than a call per day. Amherst is there providing a service when they're needed. Stevens Point doesn't know how many calls they're going to get. Amherst could have a real crazy day and have 3 or 4 calls, but the point is that we're paying people to be there, and yes, they are waiting to respond, but when the call comes, they get in the bus and they go. So I certainly see your points, but at the same time, I think in addition to just paying for the service and the cost of providing that service, you're also, looking at things like you've got a firefighters union with the city. You don't have that in Point. You don't have that in Plover. You have municipal partners. If you look at them all, you're looking at 6 different municipalities that all have varying, very different approaches to budgeting, let's say. But the county's in the position of funding the decisions that they make, and we don't really have a seat at the table except during these negotiation periods. And so that is a very challenging piece. But so far we've been able to come together and make it work. Figure out, we've negotiated this for 10 months now. So, the chiefs have talked with each other. The municipal leaders have all talked with each other. Everybody I know of, sees this as a real system approach. I was at the Amherst Fire District Commission meeting last night till about 10 o'clock talking about these same sorts of things. And just one final thing, too, is to say that this is just one piece of the system. I think the next sorts of things that I'd like to bring to the board for consideration are how do we talk about first responder or EMR groups? We need to figure out how to shore them up because they're a very important part of the system. There's even, lingering questions about the town of Grant, which has its own unique history. But, I'm speaking with the counties association and their legal counsel and our legal counsel trying to figure out what exactly is the statutory leeway that you or we as a county have to manage the system. And so maybe we can look at that and find some solutions that are better for the town of Grant, better for other people with logical arguments, behind it all. But at the end of the day, I think, government doesn't run exactly like a business, but I think this portion of it is, the numbers are reflecting what it costs, to provide it. So, but if you have other questions, I'm certainly happy to answer them.
I think, too, if the territories have changed, some of it, you have to look at the population within the territories and the numbers of potential calls within. There's the population's a lot higher within the city than it is in the outlying edges of Plover. So, Supervisor Jim Gifford.
Well, I would assume from your records, I don't think the area that Stevens Point gave up, but what was the call volume? If it were sparsely populated, well, then it didn't make a lot of difference. But if, it was 25% of their call volume, that might make a difference.
Well, there's different pieces to it. I think, one, Plover's brand new. You only have 1 year of data. So you can look at it and say, well, this year they had 900. If you're going to start making actual funding decisions on that, I think you'd want to have a much more robust data set to see what is Plover actually doing out there. The other piece for the response areas is that part of the negotiations involves, municipalities having a say in who responds to them. And so long as that's the case, those ESNs can shift somewhat over time based on what municipalities out in the county are saying to the sheriff's office in the county in terms of how the system, as it were, that they're all paying into responds to them wherever they are.
Supervisor Barry Jakowski. He beat you, Vincie.
Executive Holman, you did mention that Amherst maybe has 1 call, but you do have to realize that those of us out in the outlying areas have realized instead of waiting 35 and 40 minutes for an ambulance, we're much better, and one of the reasons that Amherst is, we're much better off to snatch and grab and take our loved ones to the hospital instead of waiting 35 and 40 minutes for an ambulance. So the data is skewed. I see nowhere in the contract where you've helped either people of the town of Grant or my people in the town of Lanark and Belmont that are still waiting 35 and 40 minutes for an ambulance.
Well, I'll say quickly that, part of the rationale for the creation of Plover, and your opinion changed quite a bit during that meeting when we were discussing adding it or not. that it was a benefit for people. Now, maybe it didn't reach down to Belmont and that neck of the woods, but I do know that, Chief Voss out of Amherst has looked at what are options that can work for them. It's not exactly the same as Town of Grant, where you have United, roughly a mile away, and you even got Station 1 of the Rapids, just another quarter mile down the road. There's Wild Rose First Responder Group, which are certainly playing a role there, but Gold Cross doesn't work the same way as United. So while PAC is running their ambulances in a different way, that's not as reliable for Belmont. But I would agree with you in the sense that if, say, Wild Rose had a station there that was ready to run, that the same sort of logical argument that the Town of Grant has made over time would apply to Belmont as well. And I think that's what I'm trying to find out from the Counties Association and others in terms of how does the statute allow us to work with those arguments. And I'm certainly not trying to make an argument that Amherst shouldn't be there or Plover shouldn't be there. My point about response time was just that when you talk about people, especially when everybody gets really political and occasionally nasty about some of this stuff, the numbers or the rationale that they use to support their argument tends to support, it's arbitrary. Like response time matters until it doesn't. Call volume matters until it doesn't. The important part is that we're providing a service. And I live in Amherst response area myself. I mean, they've responded to my house. My father-in-law passed away, and it took a little bit of time for everybody to get there. Sheriff's deputy showed up first responders after that, then the ambulance. The system worked probably better than, had Point had to drive out or Plover drive from where they were. We're certainly not as far out as, Almond and down in that neck of the woods. But I think the challenge that maybe you're trying to raise, and I certainly would agree with you, is how do we address questions that are being asked in Belmont and areas similar to that. I think there's other areas that are experiencing similar things. And no system's going to be perfect, but we can definitely do better. And that's what I'm trying to orient us toward.
Supervisor Moresi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think to address Supervisor Machikowski's concern is that if Stevens Point has a little bit less area, they are also providing a 2 paramedic service, and if I'm not mistaken, Plover is still providing a 1 paramedic service and an EMT. So there is a difference in the care that is being provided. So there's probably an additional cost to that, I'm assuming, as well.
There is an additional cost of 2 paramedic service, but I would dispute the idea that the level of care is different because I'm certainly not going to say a 2 paramedic system is bad by any means. But I think that even last week or in this past month, the state committee charged with looking at DHS 110 and how it decides whether or not we need to have a 2 paramedic system or not. The committee's decision was that municipalities with populations of 10,000 or less could have a 1 paramedic, 1 advanced EMT system in place. I think that the level of care that's showing up, if you needed medic care, somebody's driving the ambulance. Now, in a case where you need a paramedic, the paramedic's in back, and the other paramedic is driving, or the advanced EMT is driving. Maybe in the heat of the moment, there might be a certain situation or two where 2 paramedics are needed in that moment. When we discussed this, or I wasn't even in this position when it was discussed, but the RSI method was brought up as kind of a life or death scenario that was really the linchpin to all that. But what wasn't brought up in that discussion is that there are alternatives to that method that do ultimately provide the same sort of, care, let's call it, for the patient. The RSI method on its own is also not simple, even for 2 paramedics. So I think that was more of a distraction from where I was looking at it. And I think, the other piece of this is that with fewer and fewer paramedics available to work in general, and this is why the state's taking this up, most systems, especially rural systems and smaller municipalities, they wouldn't be able to get 2 paramedics to their door anyway. So I understand where the comment's coming from, but I also think we have to be careful in this. And also, I should also note that Amherst and Plover, they run 2 paramedics a lot of the time, not 100% of the time, but I think Amherst, if I remember from last night, was roughly 66% of the time they have 2 paramedics on that ambulance. Now, are they a 2 paramedic system? No, but they do run with 2 paramedics most of the time, and Plover is in a similar position.
Is it true that they have to book so many hours to be able to become a paramedic? So how do you get the hours if you can't ride the ambulance or?
Sure, there's definitely opportunities for training in that sense. The paramedic requirements are certainly more robust in terms of schooling and things like that. So yeah, I mean, in the abstract, 2 paramedics are showing up with more schooling, more education, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I think that, well, yes, I guess is the short answer to your question.
Thank you. Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
And I guess I just want to be perfectly clear as I sit here and thought about that. You're absolutely right. My opinion did change about the Plover ambulance service. And I made the statement that because it wasn't helping my constituents, and then I did change my mind because I shouldn't penalize the people that it would help. And I guess I want to be perfectly clear that I'm not complaining in any way, shape, or form about, be it Amherst or the Stevens Point or the Plovers, the individuals that provide that care. We do live in an area that we're far out, and from the Amherst fire station, there's no direct route. Well, we've all driven out in that part of the country. No road goes straight for more than a half mile at a time. It makes 90-degree curves, and we're all grateful for the people who do show up. It's a matter of time in them getting there, the response time, of course, and I do like the idea that we're working towards the first responders. I think those of us that live in the outlying areas can agree that it's the first responders, the individuals that donate their time to the fire departments that will save our lives. So I guess I just wanted to make that perfectly clear that I'm not complaining in any way, shape, or form about personnel that does come. I think they're all great individuals, highly trained and highly professional.
And I guess I just want to add that this I guess I would call phase 1, and Chris had stated it earlier that this was 10 months or longer. And Sheriff Lucas and Chris and Jenny have spent a lot of time, a lot of hours, and a lot of meetings. At the beginning of it, we actually changed directions. We had a contract and we whittled it down and almost carved out half of it to make it more palatable because of the comments and the information we were getting from the municipalities, and we were agreeing with it and working through it. Believe that this is as I said, the first phase of this, and I know Chris and I have had conversations about this, and having those emergency responders, someone that shows up with their pickup truck with a duffel bag, is far more important than that ambulance getting there. I was told by somebody that the ambulance it's just a taxi cab, it's a transportation. What's important is the person that gets there. If they've got a crash bag and they've got a defibrillator or someone to stop for their bleeding or whatever else they have in there, is far more important than having the whole ambulance there. Hopefully the ambulance is on the way and it can get there to get the person to the hospital, but that first attention that the first responders can get is the most important, and I think that's going to be the phase 2 of it, and then there's possibly a phase 3 down the road, but the first step was getting this done, and this was a big job and a big task and a big undertaking, and again, I think Portage County's plowing fresh field here. I don't think anybody else or too many other ones have these contracts and these county-wide ambulance services like Portage County does, and we're working towards trying to make it better. It's good, but I think we can make it better, and it can get better. So.
And I'd like just to chime in on one thing. It's not the current agenda item, so I'll apologize, but it's germane to the discussion because Matt's point is correct in terms of what does it cost to provide the service. You've noticed that we added money to the Amherst contract because it costs money to provide the service. And the county, to be frank, the county built Plover and didn't pay any attention to Amherst. They built Plover at $600,000, and then they looked at Amherst and said, well, $240 is good enough for you. So you can imagine how Amherst took that. Now, you can't cure all ills in one bite, and it's difficult to, from my point of view and just looking at everything, and it was a difficult conversation we had with Amherst, but they had very valid arguments in terms of we need to have some approach to equity in terms of what does it cost to provide the service, whether or not we're there for 1 call, 10 calls, or whatever, we have people there. 24/7 waiting to respond. So that's the same reason that I mentioned earlier is why you see money added to the Amherst contract.
Supervisor Bob Gifford, then Supervisor Dodge.
Yeah, this is actually more on item 10, but since we're in the middle of it, I got, at the time of the vote a couple years ago on this, I got criticism from both mayor and Alder Kneebone, who represents the part of my district that she, represents. So they overlap. And the feeling was that there was inadequate paramedic provision at that time. So should I understand that that's been worked on and it's improved quite a bit since those 2 years ago?
What I can say to that is, this Amherst and Plover are operating under a waiver under the current state law as far as do you need to have a 2 paramedic system. We'll see what the Department of Health or Human Services does with the committee's decision to say if you're less than 10,000 as a municipality, you can do a 1 paramedic system. It'll be interesting for Plover specifically because they're just slightly over that mark. We have covered in the contract. We provided language that if there were a change to a 2 paramedic system that was mandated from the state, that the county would pick that up. Now, as it stands today, we're making sure that we're following the current state law. And like I said, Plover and Amherst, this question is on the front of everything they do. That's why they've been trying to recruit paramedics to come. That's why they're running paramedics or 2 paramedics more than half the time. But I'll also add that I think that some of the criticism you may have received was kind of symptomatic of there was a real deterioration of trust between the city and county on it. And people can feel however they might want to feel about that. But at the end of the day, if you're working with partners and they have a lack of trust, then I think that starts to inspire the kind of maybe they were a little more pointed than they might have been had everybody gotten along better at the time. So yes, everybody's looking to continually improve, and I think very big picture, you're going to start to, this is at the federal level, they're looking at ways to try to ask for more from ambulance providers because there's a real issue with cost. And right now, the law says you don't get reimbursed unless you go to the emergency room. So the CMS, the federal system, is looking at, are there ways to empower certain entities to say, well, we're on the ground, we're paramedics, we can get trained a little bit more to say, this person shouldn't go to the emergency room, they should go to here or there or wherever. And that pilot program, I think, is going to start this upcoming summer. I don't know that we'll be able to participate in that. There's various amounts of costs involved, but also some logistics to it. But it will be interesting to see how that rolls out.
Any other questions? It was Supervisor Dodge and Supervisor Zastro.
I just want to say that as a town official, I'm extremely grateful that you came to an agreement with the 3 departments, because if the town of Stockton had to contract for service for our taxpayers, I have no doubt it would be far more expensive. So I do thank you for all the hard work that you did, the sheriff and all of those who participated.
It was a great team effort.
Jenny.
And
yeah.
Along the same lines, I think another piece of this we haven't mentioned is that mutual aid is something that exists. So if there's more than what any given responder can respond to, the mutual aid call goes out and all hands on deck.
Supervisor Zastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make the comment that as is in many places, in many fire districts, it boils down to a recruitment and retention issue. Amherst was certainly not immune from this, but that turns around to be an economic situation. And thank you, Executive, for working on that and helping Amherst improve on that so they can maintain with their quality staff they have. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? We should be able to go through these last 2 real easy then after this. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, press yes, and oppose no.
Discussion, though.
22 ayes, 2 nays, 1 excused. Resolution adopted.
Resolution authorizing and ratifying the 2020 ambulance service provider agreement between Portage County and Amherst Fire District.
Resolution 150, 2018-2020, submitted by Public Safety Emergency Management and the Finance Committee, authorizing the ambulance agreement with Amherst Fire and requires a 2/3 supermajority vote.
Motion by Supervisor Zastro, second by Supervisors Drake. Discussion. All those in favor, press yes, and oppose no.
24 ayes, 1 excused. Resolution adopted.
Resolution authorizing and ratifying the 2020 ambulance service provider agreement between Portage County and the Village of Plover.
Resolution 151, 2018-2020, submitted by Public Safety Emergency Management and the Finance Committee, authorizing the ambulance provider agreement with the Village of Plover and requires 2/3 supermajority vote.
Motion by Supervisor James Gifford, seconded by Supervisor O'Brien. Discussion. All those in favor, push yes, and oppose no.
Could ask.
24 ayes, 1 excused. Resolution adopted.
I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Supervisor James Gifford, seconded by Supervisor Zastro. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, we are adjourned.
Videos of these meetings are available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.